Ford built them, then hid them. From Hollywood stunt legends to regional specials no one outside the state ever saw, these 1970S Mustangs were too rare, too wild, or too politically inconvenient to promote. Fewer than a handful survive today. Each one tells a story of speed, secrecy, and survival, and once you see them, you'll understand why Ford might have preferred you never did. The 1970S weren't kind to muscle cars. Emissions laws, insurance hikes, and oil crises killed horsepower and, with it, the glory days of Detroit performance. Yet, in the shadows, Ford slipped out a few Mustangs that defied the trend. They weren't mass-produced, they weren't in glossy ads. Some existed only to meet racing rules, others to test regional markets. All of them were built in tiny numbers, often under the radar, and many were nearly lost to time. Today, they're the crown jewels of Mustang history, machines you've probably never seen and Ford would rather you didn't. Top 1. 1968 Mustang GT Bullitt, film used. It wasn't built for showroom floors. It wasn't built for the drag strip. The 1968 Mustang GT Bullitt was built to be wrecked, literally. Just a movie prop, just a fastback to crash and jump on cue. But it became the most valuable Mustang in history, and almost nobody at Ford even acknowledged it. To shoot the legendary chase scene in Bullitt, Warner Brothers purchased two Highland Green Mustang GT 390 fastbacks. One was used for close-up driving clean and polished. The other, a purpose-built stunt car. The badges were shaved, the grille blacked out, and the interior stripped of anything unnecessary. Inside it retained factory black vinyl bucket seats, a wood-trim steering wheel, and standard instrumentation, but the stunt car was reinforced. Custom welds braced the subframe, shock towers were reinforced, mounts were added to hold the 1960 camera rigs on the hood and trunk. Under the hood, both cars had a 390 CIFE V8 pushing around 325 horsepower with a 4-speed top loader and 3.25 rear gears. Acceleration? 0 to 60 in about 6.8 seconds, modest by today's standards, but agile enough to fly through San Francisco's hills. After filming, the stunt car vanished, rumored, crushed, forgotten, but in 2016 it resurfaced, dust-covered and rusting in a Tennessee garage. It had the VIN, it had the bracing, it had the mounts. It was the Bullitt car, not a replica, not a tribute, the real, battered Mustang from the film. And Ford? They had no official record of it. No attempt to preserve it. This wasn't a car they promoted, it was one they let disappear. In 2020, it sold for $3.74 million, shattering Mustang auction records. Higher than any Shelby, more than any Boss. Not because of performance, but because of legend. It was raw, unrefined, and real. A piece of American cinema history they tried to bury, now immortalized. But that was Hollywood. What if Ford intentionally released a tornado-themed Mustang into the Kansas flatlands, then erased it from memory just as fast? Up to 1970 Mach 1 Twister Special. No national commercial, no big reveal, just 96 Mustangs quietly delivered to Kansas dealerships in late 1970, each one wearing a tornado on the quarter panel and each one packing enough muscle to send a Hemi home crying. The Twister Special was a one-off regional promotion by Ford's Kansas City District Sales Office. Only 96 units were built, all based on the Mach 1 fastback. Half came equipped with the ferocious 428 Super Cobra Jet V8, complete with functional ram air, heavy-duty internals, external oil cooler, and a rated 375 horsepower. The other 48 were built with the 321 Cleveland 4V, still a potent power plant in its own right. But the SCJ cars? Those were quarter-mile assassins. Outside, every Twister wore grabber orange paint with blackout hood treatment, rear spoiler, color-keyed racing mirrors, Magnum 500 wheels, and most famously a large black Twister tornado graphic along the rear fender. Inside, the cabin was fitted with black vinyl high-back bucket seats, wood grain trim, a center console, and optional tachometer. These weren't stripped-out racers, they were factory hot rods with style and intent. But they were never advertised nationally. The cars were shipped only to Kansas Ford dealers, no brochures, no nationwide availability. It was Ford's quiet experiment in regional muscle, test the appetite for exclusive power without corporate fanfare. And most of the public never knew they existed. Many Twister specials were raced hard, traded fast, or crashed young. Survivors today are unicorns, especially the 428 SCJ versions. Their rarity, limited geography, and monstrous performance have made them six-figure collector icons. A stock SCJ Twister could run low 13s in the quarter mile with traction-limited street tires. That's fast enough to challenge big block Chevys and even early supercars. One state, one storm, one legend born from silence. But while the Twister howled through Kansas, a very different Mustang quietly rolled into showrooms in 1973. One last convertible, armed with a Cobra jet, just as the golden muscle age collapsed under its own weight. Top 3, 1973 Mustang Convertible 351 Cobra Jet. By 1973, the fire was fading. The muscle car era was collapsing under smog laws, insurance hikes, and rising gas prices. But buried in Ford's final big-body Mustang lineup was a convertible so rare even most Mustang diehards didn't know it existed. At first glance, the 1973 Mustang convertible looked tame. Long hood, soft top, bright chrome accents, built more for boulevard cruising than quarter-mile dominance. But looks were deceiving. Hidden under that unassuming hood was the Q-Code 351 Cleveland Cobra Jet, featuring a 4-barrel carburetor, higher compression, dual exhausts, and a net rating of 266 horsepower, translating to over 300 horsepower gross. Paired with a C6 automatic or 4-speed manual and mandatory 3.25 rear gears, it could still hustle 0 to 60 miles per hour in under 7 seconds. Inside, the car had high-back vinyl bucket seats, faux wood-grain dash trim, a center console with floor shifter, and optional air conditioning. The convertible top was power-operated. It wasn't stripped, it was luxury with bite. This wasn't just about speed. It was about subtle rebellion in a declining era. Only 293 convertibles left the factory with the Q-Code 351 Cobra jet engine in 1973. That's it. No fanfare, no brochures highlighting its rarity. Ford made no effort to promote it. As far as the public was concerned, the Cobra jet era was already over. But this car proved otherwise. It slipped through the cracks as one of the last true muscle Mustangs. For decades, these convertibles were overlooked, overshadowed by Bosses and Shelbys, but as collectors hunted production numbers, the 351 CJ drop top emerged from obscurity. With fewer than 300 ever made, it's now considered one of the rarest factory muscle Mustangs of the 70s. Prices have surged, especially for well-preserved matching numbers cars in original colors like bright red or medium aqua. This was the last open-air Mustang to carry the Cobra Jet badge, but while it whispered goodbye to muscle in style, the next Mustang didn't whisper at all. It screamed down the strip with NASCAR-bred internals and a rear wing you could land a plane on. Top 4 1973 Mach 1 Super Cobra Jet 429 SCJ J-Code. When Ford saw the muscle car era dying, they didn't issue a press release, they fired one last shot. That shot came in the form of the 1973 Mustang Mach 1, stuffed with the most powerful big block engine Ford had ever dropped into a Mustang, the 429 Super Cobra Jet. Most people think the SCJ era ended in 1971, but for a short window in early 1973, a few select Mach 1s were optioned with the 429 SCJ coded J in the VIN. This wasn't a detuned luxury engine, this was a drag strip brawler, solid lifters, 4-bolt mains, external oil cooler, 780 CFM Holley, forged crank and rods, and a functional Ram air shaker hood. Officially rated at 375 gross horsepower, actual output was believed to exceed 410 HP. Performance? Blistering. 0 to 60 miles per hour in under 5.9 seconds, quarter mile in the low 13s. All on street tires. It came with a 4-speed top loader, 3.91 traction lock rear, staggered shocks, and a competition suspension that made it less boulevard cruiser, more rolling cannonball. Exterior details included NASA-style hood scoops, blacked-out grille, Mach 1 striping, Magnum 500 wheels, and dual exhaust tips. Inside, it was all business. Vinyl high-back buckets, center console, rally gauges, and the unmistakable feel of a dying breed. Most came in bold colors like medium bright yellow or red glow. Here's the twist. Ford didn't promote this. SCJ-equipped 1973 Mach 1s were never highlighted in sales brochures. No official production count exists, but most historians estimate fewer than 300 units were built. Many believe the actual number could be under 250, making this one of the rarest SCJ Mustangs ever made. Collectors overlooked them for decades, assuming big block performance ended with the Boss 429. But these 73 SCJs are rarer, faster, and more mysterious. At auction, verified examples now demand over 6 figures if you can even find one. This Mach 1 was brute force disguised in chrome and stripes. But coming up next, a machine that ditched displacement for balance. It didn't scream, it cornered. And it wore a badge that changed the small block game forever. Top 5, 1970 Mach 1 Q Code 351 Cobra Jet. If the Boss 429 was the heavyweight champ, then the 1970 Mach 1 Q Code 351 Cobra Jet was the street brawler who never got the spotlight but still won the fight. It didn't roar for attention. It lunged from the shadows. Ford's 351 Cleveland Cobra Jet was new for 1970, a small block built with big ambitions. It wasn't a detuned grocery getter. With a 4-barrel carburetor, 10.71 compression, free-flow heads with huge valves, and dual exhaust, the Q Code 351 CJ pushed out 300 gross horsepower. On paper, that put it below the Boss 302. On the street, it was a different story. The 351 CJ was torque-heavy, rev-happy, and nearly bulletproof. When paired with a 4-speed top-loader, optional 3.91 traction lock rear end and staggered shocks, it delivered 0 to 60 miles per hour in just over 6 seconds and cleared the quarter mile in the mid-14s. Respectable numbers, especially for a junior Cobra Jet. This wasn't just a budget muscle car, it came wrapped in the Mach 1 package. Shaker scoop, color-keyed bumpers, reflective side stripes, Magnum 500 wheels, and sport slats. Inside, it had high-back vinyl buckets, wood-grain dash, full console, and optional rally cluster. It looked like luxury, but underneath, it was all fight. Only approximately 5,100 Q-Moog Mach 1s were built in 1970. Even fewer were optioned with the Performance Axle and Ram Air. Most were daily driven into oblivion, unlike Boss Mustangs. Few were garage queens. And that's what makes them so rare today. Collectors have finally woken up. These cars are still undervalued compared to their big block cousins, but prices are climbing fast. They offer a perfect blend of drivability, rarity, and street cred. They weren't built to be icons, but that's exactly what they became. This Mach 1 was a scalpel quick, sharp and surgically precise. But what came next threw subtlety out the window. The next Mustang on this list came straight out of Ford's Skunk Works, blueprinted for destruction and born to make enemies on the quarter mile and the racetrack alike. Top 6, 1970 Boss 429 Mustang. It wasn't built to rule the drag strip. It wasn't even built for the street. The 1970 Boss 429 Mustang was a NASCAR weapon, disguised as a muscle car, a rolling loophole in Ford's racing rulebook. In the late 1960s, NASCAR required manufacturers to homologate their race engines by putting them into street-legal cars. Ford's engineers had a monster in the works, the 429 Boss Semi-Hemi V8. But it wouldn't fit in a Torino without major compromises. The solution? Send a batch of Mustang sports roofs to Carecraft in Brighton, Michigan, where the shock towers were relocated, engine bays widened, and a hand-built 429C big block was stuffed between the fenders. Rated at 375 horsepower, gross, though real output was over 500 HP, in race trim, the Boss 429 featured aluminum Hemi-style cylinder heads, a massive 735 CFM Holley carb, forged internals, and a 4-bolt main block. It came with a top-loader, 4-speed manual, competition suspension, and 3.91 traction lock rear gears. On the street, it could do 0 to 60 miles per hour in about 5.3 seconds, and the quarter mile in the high 13s, despite weighing over 3,800 pounds. Visually, the Boss 429 was understated. A functional hood scoop, subtle Boss 429 fender decals, Magnum 500 wheels, and front chin spoiler were the only giveaways. Inside, it was Mach 1 luxury high-back vinyl buckets, wood grain trim, AM radio proof that NASCAR spec power didn't have to mean bare bones. Only 499 Boss 429s were built for 1970, making them rarer than most Shelbys, and despite their brute force, they were never meant to dominate quarter-mile times. Ford's real mission was to dominate the superspeedway, where the Boss 429 engine could breathe at 7,000 RPM for hours. The street cars? They were just the legal requirement. Today, the Boss 429 is one of the most coveted Mustangs ever, with Concours restored examples bringing over $400,000 at auction. It's a car born from racing politics, crafted by hand and buried in exclusivity. But if the Boss 429 was Ford's brute force hammer, the next Mustang was a scalpel engineered for cornering finesse, SCJ Trans Am glory, and a small block that punched far above its weight. Top 7, 1971 Boss 351 Mustang. It had no big block under the hood, no Shelby badge, yet the 1971 Boss 351 Mustang could embarrass almost anything Detroit built that year. This was Ford's final street-legal Trans Am warrior, sharp, precise, and gone too soon. By 1971, the Boss 302 program had ended, but Ford still needed a street machine to keep the performance flame alive. Enter the Boss 351, powered by the 351 Cleveland R-Code V8A high compression, small block, with 4 bolt mains, big port 4 V-heads, solid lifters, aluminum intake, and a 750 CFM Autolite car officially rated at 330 gross horsepower. Real output was even higher. Mated exclusively to a 4-speed top-loader with Hurst shifter and a 3.91 traction lock rear end, the Boss 351 could launch from 0 to 60 miles per hour in 5.8 seconds and run the quarter mile in 14.1 seconds. Numbers that put it ahead of many big block rivals. The suspension featured competition springs, staggered rear shocks, front and rear anti-roll bars, and power front disc brakes. Visually, it wore a NASA-style hood with functional ram air, blacked-out grille, honeycomb tail panel, Boss 351 graphics, and Magnum 500 wheels. Inside, drivers got high-back bucket seats, wood-grain dash accents, and a full rally instrument cluster with tachometer. It was as much a driver's car as a muscle car. Only 1,806 units were built for 1971, making it one of the rarest single-year Boss Mustangs. And it wasn't a placeholder. This was Ford's answer to tightening emissions and rising insurance costs. A small block that could run with and sometimes outrun the big boys. The Boss 351's reign was short-lived. By 1972, lower compression ratios and net horsepower ratings gutted performance across the board. The 71 Boss 351 became the last high-compression, solid-lifter performance Mustang of its era. Today, collectors prize them for their mix of rarity, agility, and raw capability values, now easily surpassing 6 figures for Concours examples. If the Boss 351 was the perfect blend of finesse and fire, the next Mustang threw balance out the window. It was a small block killer with race-bred handling, and it carried a nameplate that had already made rivals nervous for years. Top 8, 1970 Boss 302 Mustang. Mustanger? It wasn't built to dominate drag strips. It was born for corners. The 1970 Boss 302 Mustang was Ford's precision weapon for the SCCA Trans Am series, and on the street, it was as close as you could get to a factory race car. The heart of the Boss 302 was a unique high-revving small block, a 302 CI Windsor block topped with Cleveland 4V heads, solid lifters, aluminum intake, and a 780 CFM Holly carb. Officially rated at 290 horsepower gross, it could spin past 6,000 RPM and deliver far more in real-world conditions. Power went through a close ratio 4-speed top-loader to a 3.91 traction lock rear, giving it 0 to 60 miles per hour in 6.9 seconds and a quarter mile in the mid-14s. Handling was its real edge. Competition suspension, quick ratio steering, front and rear anti-roll bars, and power front disc brakes made it a scalpel in a world of hammers. On a road course, the Boss 302 could keep pace with and often beat the Camaro Z28 it was designed to dethrone. Externally, it wore a blacked-out grille, front chin spoiler, rear deck spoiler, hockey stick side stripes with Boss 302 callouts, and Magnum 500 wheels. Inside, the cabin featured high-back vinyl bucket seats, wood-grain dash trim, a Hurst shifter, and optional tachometer. It was functional, driver-focused, and free of unnecessary frills. In 1970, just 7,013 units were built. While that might seem like a lot compared to Boss 429 or Boss 351 numbers, most were driven hard, often on track days or street races, and few survived in unmodified form. The Boss 302 wasn't a status symbol, it was a tool for enthusiasts who knew how to use it. The 70 Boss 302 marked the peak of Ford's Trans Am homologation efforts. It secured the championship for Parnelli Jones and cemented the Mustang's legacy as more than just a straight-line bruiser. Today, finding a numbers-matching, unmolested example is a challenge, and prices reflect that, often exceeding six figures. The 1970 Boss 302 didn't just win a championship, it left a legacy etched in asphalt. Every surviving example carries the DNA of a purpose-built racer, a car that proved Mustang could dance as hard as it could punch. And for those lucky enough to drive one today, every gear change is a reminder that this was the year Ford perfected the balance between raw power and razor-sharp control. A balance the world would never see in quite the same way again. We've uncovered the ghosts of Ford's 1970s lineup Mustangs that lived short, violent lives, only to return decades later as million-dollar legends. Each car here represents a moment when Ford ignored the market trends and built something for passion, politics, or pure racing ambition. And though Ford never meant for them to be icons, history had other plans. If you enjoyed this journey through the rarest of the rare, hit subscribe, share your Mustang memories in the comments, and join us next time as we explore more hidden chapters from the golden age of American performance.